Sometimes, in the quiet hours before sunrise, you might find yourself watching a tree outside your window. Its trunk stands in the blue hush, dark and unmoving, a silhouette against the slow brightening of the world. For a moment, it is only what it appears to be: wood, bark, sap, a living pillar dividing earth from sky. But if you let your attention linger, the feeling of solidity begins to shift. The tree is not just there, it is held, somehow, in a web of relationships. The wind moves through its leaves, the roots drink from invisible rivers underground, sunlight is caught and transformed within each cell. There is a subtle order in the branching of twigs and the spiral of leaves, a pattern that repeats itself in fern, in shell, even in the veins beneath your own skin. We rarely notice how strange this is. The world offers itself as matter, as weight and shape and texture. But beneath the surface, every detail is a kind of message, an arrangement, a sequence, a pattern that could, in principle, be described, measured, or even written. The veins in the leaf, the rings in the wood, the timing of the first blossom, all of them are records as much as forms, evidence of something that is not merely physical but also meaningful. If you listen closely to your own heartbeat, you might sense the same tension. The rhythm is steady, but no two moments are quite the same. Each beat carries information, a signature of the day, the hour, the life behind it. The tree grows, but it grows according to rules. Rules that are not carved in stone, but enacted in each moment, passed along from cell to cell, from root to branch, from season to season. What if the tree is not only wood and leaf, but also a kind of text? Not in the simple sense of a metaphor, but as a literal arrangement of information, a living document, written in the language of atoms and energy, yet readable to those who know how to look. The tree could be seen as a physical object, yes, but it could also be seen as the outcome of countless instructions, decisions, and constraints. Its presence is both an event and a record, both a thing and a process. There is a quiet astonishment in this, that the familiar world might be more than it seems, that the solidity of things might be underwritten by something as intangible as information. The tree does not simply exist, it is processed, generated, maintained by a web of interactions, as if reality itself were performing a computation, or living out a story, at every scale, from the arrangement of molecules to the slow rotation of the earth. You might begin to suspect that what we call matter is only the visible tip of something deeper. That the patterns we see are not just accidents but signals. That even the silence around the tree, the darkness before dawn, is full of structure, waiting to be read, waiting to be understood. If the tree is not only wood and leaf, then the next question is what kind of layer makes such a thing possible? We rarely notice that the word information arrives carrying a heavy trail of metaphors, networks, signals, code. But what if we set these aside for a moment, stripping away the digital associations and the flicker of screens? What remains, in the quiet, is something older and more fundamental. At its deepest, information is not a human invention, not the property of language or computers. It is the capacity for one thing to distinguish itself from another. A difference that makes a difference. Before pattern is translated into language, before data is counted or transmitted, there is simply the fact that a tree is not a stone, a heartbeat is not a silence, a shadow is not the light that casts it. The world is full of distinctions, edges, boundaries, forms, that persist even when no one is there to name them. Imagine the quiet pulse of a code beneath appearance, not written by anyone, but inherent in the way things can be separate, or connected, or transformed. This is information before the metaphor. The raw possibility that things could have been otherwise and the world, in each instant, chooses a path from all its alternatives. If we listen with enough patience, we start to sense that what we call matter might simply be the most stable manifestation of these distinctions, an enduring pattern held in the field of possibility. In this view, information does not belong to computers or to minds. It is the substrate that allows anything to be itself, and not something else. It is what lets the world articulate itself into the forms we see and touch. Once we begin to treat information not as a metaphor, but as a layer, real, irreducible, prior to interpretation, then matter itself starts to lose the simplicity of substance, and becomes something stranger. The frozen surface of a deeper flow. The question is no longer how we describe reality, but what reality is doing when it draws these distinctions, over and over, across every scale, as if the world is more than its surface, but less than its shell. There is a sense, quiet and persistent, that what we call matter is only the surface tension of something deeper, an interface where meaning condenses into form. Imagine a stone resting on the forest floor at night, its cool surface gathering the dew. To the hand, it is heavy and silent. But to the mind that lingers, the stone becomes more than mineral structure. It is a crystallized message, held together by a pattern that persists across millennia. Every atom is placed according to a logic that is not invented, but discovered, a grammar written in the arrangement of things, repeating itself from the heart of the earth to the orbit of distant moons. What we experience as solidity is, at another level, the stabilization of a set of relationships, an equilibrium reached not by accident, but through the selective endurance of what can be maintained. Matter, in this view, is not something that simply exists. It is something that has achieved a kind of informational harmony with its surroundings, a frozen meaning that resists dissolution for a time. The table beneath your hand, the breath leaving your chest, the light from a star, each is a brief persistence of pattern, a held note in the vast composition that is the universe. If we attend to this, the distinction between object and information blurs. The world ceases to be a collection of inert things, and becomes a field of ongoing interpretation, where every presence is also a form of encoded persistence. Perhaps, then, we do not live among mute objects, but among the survivors of an endless process of selection, stabilization, and meaning-making. If objects are formed this way, then the laws that hold them together may be less like decoration and more like instruction. There is a quiet strangeness in the fact that the laws of nature do not merely describe the world, they enforce it. Gravity is not a story we tell to explain why an apple falls, but the continuous, invisible act that assures the apple cannot do otherwise. The regularities we call laws are not written on a distant scroll, but seem to operate here, now, within the very fabric they constrain. It is easy to imagine them as fixed, like carved rules posted above the stage of matter. Yet the more closely we look, the less inert they become. Each particle's trajectory, each flicker of energy, each fleeting pattern in the quantum foam emerges not because it is permitted, but because it is incessantly processed, evaluated, checked, allowed. This is the quiet work of an instruction set. Not a list of rules imposed from above, but a dynamic sequence of operations, running everywhere, always, without pause. The law is not a passive boarder, it is an engine. It generates what is possible, and just as relentlessly, it suppresses what is not. Every structure that persists, an atom, a mountain, a memory, exists only because the underlying code has made it so, step by step, update by update. When we say the speed of light is constant, we are not referring to a fact that merely sits in a textbook. We are naming a constraint that is being executed, again and again, at every point in space and time. The regularities we observe are not decorations. They are the living pulse of a process that has no outside. Perhaps this is why the universe feels less like an object and more like a system, one that does not simply exist, but is always running, always verifying itself. The law is not background. It is the ongoing act by which the surface of reality is, in truth, an ongoing computation. There is a subtle restlessness in the fabric of reality. Nothing sits fully still, not even the laws we sometimes imagine as ancient and unyielding. If you watch the world with patient attention, you may notice that order itself is never simply imposed from above. Instead, it emerges, flickers, sometimes recedes. The shape of a coastline, the way a cloud transforms as it drifts, the pattern of frost on a window pane, each is written not once, but again and again, as if the universe is reciting its principles in real time, never quite settling on a final draft. It is tempting to picture reality as a finished scene, with rules like scaffolding holding everything in place. But perhaps the scaffolding is itself alive, a process, not a product. Law becomes a living script, continually executed, revised, sometimes even contested within the system it shapes. The cosmos does not simply obey its own logic. It seems to negotiate with it, adjusting, recalibrating, searching for new forms of coherence as conditions shift. What we call the laws of nature may be less like commandments and more like evolving habits, tendencies that persist because they are continually reinforced, but that can, under pressure, transform. The universe is not a painting, but a performance. Its order is not imposed once and for all, but composed, note by note, in a ceaseless and improvisational unfolding. If the system can produce order, the next question is whether it also produces the beings who can notice that order at all. There is a temptation to imagine ourselves as spectators, peering into the workings of the universe from a vantage point outside its machinery. Centuries of scientific detachment have fostered the sense that we are impartial witnesses, observing the dance of particles and galaxies with the luxury of distance. But if the world is not merely things in space, but a living process of information, then the very act of observing is already part of what the world is doing. Consider for a moment the ripple of a thought arising within the mind, a question, a flash of recognition, the slow assembling of a pattern out of scattered impressions. It feels private, yet it is not sealed off from the world. That ripple is as much a part of the universe's unfolding as the collision of two atoms or the flowering of a star. In a system where information is the substrate, the boundary between the observer and the observed begins to dissolve. The mind does not float above the world. It is an eddy in the current, shaped by the same flows it contemplates. The neural architectures within us, the recursive loops of memory and anticipation, are not exceptions to the algorithms that organize reality. They are instances of it, running locally, self-similar to larger structures. Our capacity to notice, to question, to imagine, these are not accidental byproducts, nor are they passive reflections. They are active functions of the system, feedback mechanisms through which information processes itself, refines itself, and, perhaps, searches for its own next form. Perhaps what we call consciousness is not a ghost in the machine, but a stream within the river, a place where the system has become complex enough to model itself from within. Our thoughts, then, are not simply about the world. They are moves within it, operations in the ongoing computation that gives the universe its shape. The observer, once imagined as a separate entity, is recast as a node of processing, an experiment the living information system runs upon itself. This is not to diminish the strangeness of experience, or the sense of inwardness that marks each life. But it does invite us to see ourselves not as external examiners of a puzzle, but as pieces whose own activity is part of the solution. In this view, our questions are not intrusions, but the process continuing its own unfolding. There are moments when the act of questioning feels less like a choice and more like an inevitability, an impulse that rises unbidden, as if the world itself is searching through us for something it does not yet know. Curiosity, in this light, is not an ornament atop a finished structure, but a process folded into the very mechanism of reality. It is as if the universe, in the shape of a human mind, traces its own boundaries with gentle fingers, probing for the edges of what is possible. A neural network, whether biological or cosmic, does not merely receive information. It seeks, it hypothesizes, it explores the terrain of its own uncertainty. The questions that surface in our consciousness, what is this? Why does it behave this way? Could it be different? Maybe more than accidents of biology. They could be the system's own recursive algorithms, running through us, iterating on the patterns that have not yet settled into law. Imagine curiosity not as a luxury, but as a necessary function, like metabolism, or gravity, or the conservation of energy. Without it, the information structure would stagnate, unable to adapt or refine the rules that allow for complexity. Our wonder is not a private theater, but a public process, a movement within the whole, pushing at the boundaries so the boundaries can shift. Perhaps, in every act of inquiry, reality gently perturbs itself, nudging the neural net onward, testing its own limits through the windows we call questions. We rarely notice how reality disciplines itself, quietly, as if beneath our threshold of attention. Yet in every corner of experience, a principle of refinement operates with patient insistence. A stone thrown into a still pool sends out ripples, disturbing the surface, yet the water does not remain chaotic. It smooths itself, absorbs the shock, and returns once more to equilibrium. In the same way, the universe seems to allow for disturbance and error, but only as a way to test, to probe, to reveal its own deeper structure. Each shock, each question, each failed pattern becomes a signal, an opportunity for correction, for learning, for subtle adaptation. If the laws of reality are not fixed edicts but habits formed through this ceaseless cycle of testing and restoration, then what we call order is not imposed from outside. It emerges from countless acts of trial and error, from the interplay of possibility and constraint. There is a hidden discipline here, a kind of self-observation built into the substrate of things. Even the most fundamental constants, numbers that seem unchanging, might be the result of countless rounds of calibration, each one a ripple in that infinite, self-balancing pool. Perhaps this is why reality is never quite still. Every new form, every anomaly, every question we pose becomes a gentle perturbation. The universe listens, responds, and in its response, becomes just a little more itself. We are not merely observers of this discipline, we are among its instruments, our curiosity and our errors part of the process that tests, corrects, and quietly perfects itself. There is a strange humility that arises when we consider that everything we are, thought, feeling, sensation, is not outside the system, but one of its countless internal ripples. The sense of isolation fades, replaced by an intuition that to exist is to be a node, a pattern, a moving line within a vast, recursive computation. Some images come to mind. The ripple of a thought passing through a silent mind. The way a melody exists only as it is played, but leaves an imprint on both air and memory. If the rules of the universe are not merely enforced from without, but grown and tested from within, then our perceptions, our choices, even our confusions, become ingredients in the ongoing process. Belonging, in this context, is not a reward or a burden. It is a kind of participation, unbidden, but essential. We are not mere observers of reality's logic, nor distant analysts of its code. We are the logic as it is lived, the code as it is run and rewritten. Every question we ask, every pattern we notice or miss, becomes part of the feedback loop that shapes what is possible next. There is something both unsettling and quietly comforting in this. That our curiosity, our error, our hope, are not side effects, but threads woven into the fabric. To belong to the process is to be responsible, but never in the old, punitive sense. It is more like being a single cell in a living organism. The cell does not need to understand the whole, yet its activity is part of the being's health, its future, its ability to change and survive. When we accept that we are not outside the network but inside, then even our smallest questions resonate. They participate in the silent, ongoing act of reality refining itself. In this view, our role is not foreign but deeply, quietly necessary. There is a kind of humility that arrives when we realize we are not spectators, but participants in something vast, a system whose questions are not foreign to us, because they pass through us as our own. To see ourselves not as detached witnesses, but as an active thread in the tapestry of information, is to inhabit a different silence. The silence of being asked, rather than only told. Perhaps the most astonishing thing is not that reality can be read as information, or that the laws themselves adapt and evolve. It is that our own curiosity, our search for meaning, our urge to test, to doubt, to reach, these, too, are woven into the process. The universe does not simply compute, it listens. It does not merely generate outcomes, but receives new questions through the intricate branching of consciousness within itself. This is a quiet honor. To be the place where the system folds inward, asking itself, what else could I become? Every thought, every act of attention, is a small experiment, an impulse in the neural web of the real. We are, perhaps, the universe's way of refining its own code. Not outside the algorithm, but a recursive loop, in which the questioner and the questioned are indistinguishable. It is tempting to ask what this means for us, individually. The answer is not a doctrine, but an opening. If our questions matter, then meaning is not imposed from above, but emerges from within, the slow, collective unfolding of curiosity, insight, and care. In this view, the world is not only what is given, but what is continually being asked. There is a silence at the end of such thoughts, a pause in which the world itself seems to wait for a response. As if, beneath all the noise and movement, reality is holding a question, waiting to see what we will do with it, and that the answer is, in part, shaped by us.